Right, lads. It's time for a serious one, isn't it? Like, you know it's going to be a serious video if the nerdy Brit decides to sit down rather than do it stood up. On the other hand, though, it gives you a cool look at this shelf and all the Daleks on display. This guy's a new one. It's like a proper, like, old Doctor Who toy. It's like a Sontaran. Wait, give on focus on it. Look at that. Comparison of Sontaran toys. Yes, that's what you want on this channel. So, let's talk about the Doctor Who fandom. Because obviously, you know, I've done a bit of clickbait in the thumbnail and I've gone toxic, ? It's not a question. The Doctor Who fandom is very toxic. But I think I'd be making an immediate mistake if I pretended that this hasn't been the case, probably since Jodie's casting. Because I think the way we have to look at, like, the situation of what the Doctor Who fandom is like, there's toxic on so many different levels. Because I think to analyse how toxic the Doctor Who fandom is, we have to understand that it is toxic on so many levels. I mean, for example, we've said, the Doctor Who fandom has kind of been considered toxic. I mean, probably longer than Jodie Whittaker was cast as the Doctor. But I mean, that was one type of toxic, and it still is to this day. Yes, there are lots of sexist people who never wanted a female Doctor, and hate diversity, and don't want male Time Lords to become female Time Lords, and vice versa. And that's the least fun kind of toxic. But weirdly, and please don't get me wrong, that is a horrible type of, you know, any form of sexist, homophobic toxicity is not good at all. But weirdly within the fandom, that kind of toxicity is actually quite easily dealt with. And yes, there are some blurring of the lines, and we'll definitely get into that, but you can clearly tell when someone is being outwardly homophobic or outwardly sexist, and you go, fuck you. I don't want to interact with you. I don't consider you a worthwhile part of the fandom to interact with, therefore I'm not going to. Like, will we, for years to come in the Doctor Who fandom, have to deal with blatant sexism and blatant homophobia? Yes. We will. Unfortunately, we're always going to have to deal with that, but that's our job as a fandom, to keep fighting against those ideals and making sure we don't allow those to become popular opinions in any way. But then we also have the side of the Doctor Who fandom that's less overtly toxic. I mean, this kind of stuff is almost inevitable. For a show that's gone on for 60 years and has had so many people watch different amounts of it and, like, join at different points. Like, you'll have people in conversations that have been watching it since 1963, and there'll be people that literally just watch Flux, for example. And in no way are you any less of a fan of Doctor Who if you've just watched Flux or watched the entirety of the show. You are in no way less of a fan of Doctor Who, and you are deserving of the same amount of respect, in my opinion. But so many points for, like, jumping onto the show mean that people have different things they're used to from the show, different things they really like about the show, and then different things they really don't like about the show. And a lot of that came full force with the Chris Chibnall, Jodie Whittaker era, where a lot of people had a lot of problems with it, and a lot of people really loved it. Like, this could be my mistake, and this could be a really, really vocal minority, but my god, with the Jodie Whittaker era, people either love it or they hate it. If you're curious, by the way, I probably am in the middle of that. Mainly because I like Doctor Who and I like new stuff within Doctor Who. Even though a lot of it for me isn't great, but it's perfectly watchable. I can't lie. It's also important to address the fact that the show has gone through rocky periods before, like the 80s weren't a great time for the show, and then also Stephen Moffat's era had mixed opinions on it. I think people actually forget that, like, lots of people, especially in the transition from RTD to Stephen Moffat, a lot of people couldn't get with the show. And you know, there is a clear showing that people started to drop off in viewership, especially in the Capaldi era. But I think Jodie's time in the show, that's where things really became hectic. A lot of that is probably down to, you know, it sounds wanky to say the rise of social media, but you've got to admit more people use social media than ever, and there's just more opinions. Mixed with, you've got an incredibly controversial era where this is a show people are so passionate about that if it isn't what they're used to and their vision, they are very negative towards it. And this has created a very toxic space for multiple reasons. I mean, one of the big debates around the Jodie Whittaker era is criticism. What are fans allowed to criticise and what are fans not allowed to criticise? Because a lot of the arguments that were made, there was a lot of talk about how we should try and be positive about a show, and the idea came up a lot, and I've kind of touched on this in previous videos, I'll link them up in the card, but the idea of if you don't like watching Doctor Who, or you don't enjoy the new Doctor Who, you either shouldn't be watching it, in the more extreme cases, but you shouldn't be spreading negative opinions, only positive opinions. And I agree and disagree with this to a certain extent. Look, I think it becomes a point where if you're sharing too many negative opinions, it's just not interesting anymore. If you really just don't like something, maybe it's just not the thing for you anymore. But I do think with such like a long-running British staple, and to be fair, worldwide staple, people are going to have opinions, and just because someone's opinion doesn't line up with your opinion, doesn't mean you can't criticise it. And then to sum up all of this stuff, because I think you guys know a lot of this stuff, and I kind of want to get onto like my own opinions and how I feel about a lot of it, you've then got the current RTD era, where certain things have come up about, for example, people not being happy about the 60th and Tennant's casting, and ideas that people aren't happy that it seems to just be celebrating 2009, which, as I've discussed on this channel, I don't believe is the case, but you've got things like that to factor in. And I think the first thing to explain here is, and I'm genuinely trying not to generalise here, a lot of the similar voices who loved the Whittaker era have been criticising the RTD era. Two contradictions here. As we've discussed, the big thing people try to talk about in the Whittaker era is if you don't like it, stop spreading negativity, try and only spread positivity. Some fans who would then sprout that message about Jodie have been doing the opposite about RTD, and that's contradictory, and that's not on. My quick point of defence specifically about RTD is let it air. Yes, there were certain fans, for example, criticising Flux before it happened. There's a difference between not feeling excited for something and actively criticising it before it has happened. And there is a complete difference there. I personally have made critical comments about Doctor Who Flux, for example, yet I've seen it. I haven't seen the 60th, therefore I'm not going to criticise or necessarily praise it. For example, and this is where I think people having a problem with an RTD opinion was correct, is there was a controversy around David Tennant not regenerating but still like wearing Jodie's costume. Russel made some comments. You can research that situation for yourself if you don't know. But that, for me, was a perfectly valid criticism. Not only had we seen the episode, that is a change we have seen happen within the show, but then Russel made comments clarifying it, and people had problems with not only what happened, but also the comments Russel had made, and therefore that is a decision you can genuinely criticise, because it's happened and we can see it. But for example, criticising the 60th over not feeling like a proper anniversary special, we don't know the surprises that are coming. Matt Smith could pop up, and other characters could pop up. As David has said, many more characters that were filmed with behind closed doors are coming. So we should worry less and wait and see. And then, if the 60th rolls round and there isn't enough celebration, then that's an active criticism going, you know what, I don't think this celebrates the eras enough. And that can be an active conversation. But let's not have that conversation before it actually happens. In terms of my place in this whole toxic fandom thing, I think it's been hard sometimes. Look, I made the active decision, for example, about, I think it was like 3-4 months ago. It was before 2023 to make this purely a Doctor Who channel, because it's what I wanted to do. But that has sometimes made it hard when sometimes you'll make a video and, you know, sometimes opinions on said video aren't kind, and you know, whenever you're releasing a video, especially on the more controversial side, because no, as a content creator, I don't want to just always walk the line in a really positive and non-active, I never want to always try and be non-controversial. Not saying I want to try and be controversial, but I never want to avoid controversy at all costs. And I think my journey and development has been, for example, realising a couple of times I've made videos that I wouldn't make again now because I think they spread the wrong message, or maybe... For example, my big example is I made a video after Eve of the Daleks about Chibnall and why his Who just hadn't worked, but I think I said the things I wanted to say in the wrong way, maybe attracted kind of like some of the wrong people like to my channel, and that's a video I do regret. And I think it's about, as Doctor Who fans, working out how, because we're never going to fix the quote-unquote toxic fandom situation. We never are, because, as I've explained, the history of the show, as I've said, the passion people have for the show is always going to incite strong opinions. But what we can do is try and encourage the fandom we want. For example, the Who Addicts, a massive, massive channel in the Doctor Who space, who, when they made multiple very transphobic comments, the fandom kind of shut them out. Not saying we should be, like, exiling people from fandoms and things like that, but we should be deciding the conversations we want to encourage and, like, make big things, and we can decide the conversations we don't want to engage in and don't want to be a part of. And let's also remember there is a difference between toxic stuff and just things not being fun and enjoyable, and a bit of healthy debate. There is nought wrong with going, oh, what, you think 7B is a masterpiece? I personally think 7B is a piece of shit. Like, Series 7B might be worse than Flux. It really is. Series 7B is shite. Anyway, that's just my kind of ramblings on Doctor Who fandom. This is a video I kind of fancied making, so I thought I'd make it. Please leave your vaguely respectful comments in the comment section, just because I would like to hear from you guys, because it's a video which I think could have some interesting thoughts. Everyone could have an opinion. People could think I'm an utter knobhead and give me 50 examples of when I've been part of the toxic fandom. Who knows, but, you know, that's life. If you'd like a video that goes into the David Tennant situation specifically, and like the hate revolving towards like the 14th Doctor in a bit more detail, you can click this video, because I think that gives you a better explanation of that specific situation and why fandom, I believe, is wrong in that scenario. Yeah, give it a watch. I promise you, it's not a bad video.